If you like audiobooks or audio shows, check out a free trial of Audible. Just click the link in the description.
Welcome to MINDSHOCK. This is your host, Bruce McGuire, and this is part 2 of the logical analysis of the Flat Earth debate between Craig of Fight the Flat Earth and KALEB, KCDINDUSTRY. And once again, I do have to apologize. I am only a mere mortal. It's very difficult to handle the level of mental disability and gophery that Craig is putting forth here. And I have to hand it. I have to hand it to KALEB. I have to hand it to Austin Whitsitt. I have to hand it to Jeranism. I have to hand it to anybody who could handle this level of gophery. I mean, it's tough. It's tough. Just getting through this debate was so tough. I'm going to try to bang this out in one more part. But again, I do apologize. And I apologize in advance if I need to make this a 3-parter. I'm going to do my best to finish this up now. But again, I am only a mere mortal. I'm just a man. There's only so much that I can handle. And I have no idea how some of these people can handle these multi-hour discussions with these mental midgets. Again, that was not part of the argument, which is why it's not an ad hominem logical fallacy. For all the clueless goofs out there that do not understand how logical fallacies work, like clearly Craig, and notice how Craig, in his triggered stupor, him and all his fanboys that have been trolling the comment section on Twitter and on YouTube here under my logical analysis here, notice how not a single one of them demonstrated how what I labeled as a logical fallacy wasn't actually a fallacy. Notice how they have not been able to refute a single point made. And they also hallucinated that either I'm dumb or wrong and pretended that all I did was call Craig a goof. Now, I'm not going to deny that I objectively called him a goof, because obviously he's a goof. A goof is someone who's silly, is goofy, obviously, no logical capability, or playing stupid, whatever, intentionally, unintentionally a goof. They completely ignored 99% of the presentation. I mean, I have all of these sources from, these are academic sources, Harvard, various different papers, clearly demonstrating that Craig is not just completely and utterly clueless, but he didn't even regurgitate the religious tenets of his scientism as it pertains to the theory of relativity, in particular, what Craig is inaccurately calling a scientific experiment. So Eddington's observations, his fallacious tests, they didn't even predict anything accurately. So Craig is hallucinating and pretending and claiming that these predictions were accurate. Now, even if they were accurate, like, the Mayans with their flat earth cosmology accurately predicting eclipses, actually predicting, that doesn't make the reasoning behind it true, just like it wouldn't make relativity true. But the point here is Craig is so utterly clueless and ignorant of basic physics history. He made the claims that these tests were done and they were repeated and they were all accurate. They weren't. That's the whole point. I mean, he's not even at a first grade English comprehension level, let alone a middle school or high school understanding of any of this history, because in the subsequent tests or observations, obviously this is not scientific experiment. Eddington's experiment was clearly not scientific. And again, notice how all these goofs and trolls and Craig fanboys, and again, I'm not even sure if they can be real fanboys. They're probably paid shills. I mean, what kind of a functioning human being would actually be a fan of a goof like Craig? I don't know. Maybe the mentally disabled stick together and stick up for each other just for being on the same mentally disabled team. Probably paid shills. I mean, who knows? But notice how they couldn't refute a single one of these points. They continued to hallucinate that I'm the one that didn't know what I was talking about. And notice how I'm the only one that brought any sources whatsoever to the table. Because Craig is just regurgitating the religious scientific dogma, but he's not even sourcing the dogma. He's not even sourcing where Eddington's claims came from. I'm the only one that actually looked at any historical sources. I'm the only one that provided any actual definitions of anything being discussed here. Whereas all Craig did is hallucinate and bring forth these religious regurgitations from his cult. And all of his supporters and the trolls in the comment sections, they couldn't refute any of it. They have no sources of their own. And they can only cry on how I was somehow randomly dinging him. I mean, the dings are for each and every fallacy. I actually missed a few when I went and looked it over. I actually missed a couple for Craig. He committed more. And I think I might have missed one or two for KALEB as well. I actually don't even remember, because he did, obviously he wasn't doing a lot of talking. It was mostly Craig with his religious regurgitations. But let me finish the intro here. Obviously, if you want to help support MINDSHOCK, help bring back logic and reason to a world where it's quickly going extinct. I mean, do you really want a world full of Craigs? I mean, that's scary. I mean, and there's a lot of these goofs out there. I mean, I don't know if they're as dumb as Craig per se, but there's a lot of them out there. So that's the difference in terms of what is or isn't a fallacy. When I clearly lay out the entire argument, demonstrate with empirically verifiable definitions for all of these terms, both scientific and relating to the fallacious, to the logical fallacies themselves, and then I call Craig a goof, that's not a fallacy. Whereas Craig claiming I'm wrong, and I don't know what I'm talking about, or I'm stupid, or whatever, or I'm dumber than flat earthers, or whatever the goof said in the comment section, that's fallacious because there's no argument there. If he provided the argument and then said that's why I'm dumber, then it wouldn't be a fallacy. Is everybody following here? I can't believe I even had to boil it down. I can't believe I had to lower that to like a first, I mean, that's probably kindergarten level, maybe even preschool. Maybe even preschool. I mean, I don't know. There might be some smart preschoolers out there. But if you want to help support MINDSHOCK and help me continuing to do what I do, exposing these scientism cultists, bringing down the IQ levels of everybody, you can donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. You can support the MINDSHOCK channel by becoming a YouTube member right here on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe, like, and share. Twitter, Facebook, and Patreon. Patrons do get priority for case topic, logical analysis, co-podcast requests. You can also be a guest on the podcast depending on your tier. Questions, comments, theories, thoughts, suggestions, rebuttals, debunkings of any kind, leave them in the comment section. Okay, before I continue the analysis right where we left off, I am going to read a comment from a patron, Scott Free, a very, very astute listener who had some great observations. Here's one of his comments. Because of the continued shower of sparks resulting from this supremely mind-shocking video, it is a little difficult to focus on all of the thoughts this video is provoking in me, and I am not even finished. But I just have to say something before heading to work. The discussion surrounding redshift alone is just invaluable. I had always taken Eddington's results as one of the evidential pillars justifying relativity. So to hear the results so thoroughly investigated is both mind-shockingly and heroically important. Great work, Bruce. And again, it's not just him. I mean, look at Craig. A lot of these cultists, they look at Eddington's so-called results. Keep in mind, they threw away everything that didn't match. Over 400% error in predictions versus future observations, which also might not be accurate. The error rate might be far greater than that. I mean, this is best case scenario. This is the admitted 400% off. This is best case scenario, is these astronomical errors. And this is why most scientism cultists hallucinate that relativity actually is backed by something. I mean, look how many times Craig repeats the fallacy. The stack of fallacies, rather, not a single fallacy. Because that's all he has, and he didn't even source it. That's the thing. I mean, there's scientism cultists out there that could at least provide the sources, but he never does. Notice that. Very, very telling. And none of the triggered goof trolls provide any kind of sources either. I always do, of course. They're on the screen right now. But anyway, yeah, so Scott Free is definitely not alone in thinking that Eddington had some kind of substance there, which he obviously did not. Continuing his post here, what I and so many perhaps accidental supporters of scientism have fallen for is an epic appeal to authority, monolithic structure. And we have trusted the people that have communicated Eddington's results without investigation. Excellent point, Scott Free there. And think about the mental strength Scott Free has to have in order to admit that to himself. So this is an individual who is clearly not a narcissist, whose ego has him on too short strings to re-examine any of these things. Because obviously clueless goofs like Craig, I mean, these narcissists, these mentally disabled narcissists, I mean, let's not fall for false dichotomies. Mentally disabled people can be narcissists as well. Just look at Craig. They just don't have the mental strength. Forget about intelligence. Mental strength is a different category. You could be extremely dumb, but mentally strong. You could be extremely intelligent and mentally weak. So these are all obvious possibilities. But Scott Free here has the mental strength to re-examine. And just on that point, I'm going to go over one more quote that I've gone over in the past a number of times in regard to the religious cult of scientism, but I will do it again because it's so related here. On Richard Feynman, one of the most celebrated so-called scientists, he had a very, very interesting quote on what science is. Science is the belief in the ignorance of the experts. So a clueless, bootlicking, authority-worshipping cultist goof like Craig, if he sees something written, oh, Eddington predicted this, oh, and it was accurate, oh, and every subsequent test matched those predictions, he's not going to fact-check any of that. I mean, brain-dead goofs like Craig, they don't fact-check anything. It's their core religious tenets. It's blasphemy to fact-check what the priests have preached. They have to take it on blind religious faith. They have to. That's the way their brain or whatever's in their head that substitutes for a brain. Because I don't even know if Craig can tie his shoes. Should we start a poll? Who thinks Craig can tie his own shoes? Because I mean, it's kind of difficult to believe that Craig can tie his own shoes. What does everybody think? Do you think he's capable of tying his own shoes? So here's the full quote from Feynman. Learn from science that you must doubt the experts. As a matter of fact, I can also define science another way. Science is the belief in the ignorance of the experts. When someone says science teaches such and such, he is using the word incorrectly. So obviously that's the vast majority of goofs out there. Science doesn't teach it, experience teaches it. If they say to you, science has shown such and such, you might ask, how does science show it? How did the scientists find out how, what, where? Not science has shown, but this experiment, this effect has shown. And you have as much right as anyone else about hearing about the experiments, but we must listen to all the evidence to judge whether a reasonable conclusion has been arrived at. So you can see that Craig here and a lot of these other scientism cultist goofs are clearly not following this at all. They just took it on blind faith. They never demonstrate how. I mean, Craig, literally all of the verbal diarrhea coming out of Craig's mouth is just nonsense, because he never once says how. He just repeats and regurgitates the dogma and then is outraged when anybody doesn't accept the religious dogma at face value. Because again, he claimed, oh, Eddington's experiment, he calls it an experiment, it showed this, it proves this. The Coriolis proved this because of the spin. He never once says how. Notice that. Notice that. He's bottom of the barrel. This is why it's very difficult. I mean, call me crazy, call me fallacious. I am going to appeal to incredulity right here, and I'm not going to deny it like all the clueless goofs. I'm going to appeal to incredulity. I find it extremely difficult to believe that Craig is not legitimately mentally disabled. Or, again, he's just this phenomenal actor, and the Globe Earth shill budget is far greater than any of us can imagine. I mean, they could just pull these actors that are better than anybody in Hollywood like Craig, if he's not really mentally disabled, and just play this level of stupidity so convincingly. Because he's convincing. I mean, I've never seen somebody who's not actually mentally disabled be so realistic in portraying mental disability as Craig. So again, Craig not once can demonstrate how or why, because again, he doesn't understand the scientific method. He doesn't understand the manipulation of variables. He doesn't understand false cause logic and fallacies. He didn't even study the religion well, because he doesn't even know that his own religion of scientism doesn't even match the claims he's making. So, continue. Oh, and for the source, Feynman said this at the 15th annual meeting of the National Science Teachers Association in 1966. For all the goofs that are going to claim he never said that. Okay. And again, even if he wasn't the one that said it, the merit behind what he said. Because if goofs like Craig actually understood that, they would have examined Eddington's alleged experiment, seen how all of the non-matching data was thrown out, how all of the follow-up tests, I mean, they're getting error rates of over 400%. So it didn't match the prediction in the first place. So is it reasonable to conclude that Eddington proved Einstein's relativity in any way? Obviously, anybody with a functioning brain would say no. So continuing Scott Free's post here. Just one note about the psychology of Craig, who really is an enigma as to whether he is so dense as to not realize how absurd he sounds, or as to what his motivations are for subjecting us all to such a painful display. The cult of scientism is so pervasive that I think a lot of folks like Craig are so excited to participate with the orthodox approved institutions of science that they willingly dive into the whole fictional belief system without any scrutiny. One small example being Eddington and the redshift, and happily digest, believe, and repeat the gibberish is because at root it makes them feel smarter than other people. It strokes their ego and makes them feel as if they are in the club of knowledgeable ones, in quotations. It is the same propaganda tactic as managing to convince so many people that anyone who would take ivermectin, a drug on par with aspirin until recently, is so stupid because suddenly science, in quotations, now says it's a horse dewormer. Without noticing that yesterday ivermectin was considered harmless, they gleefully chortle at the idiocy of people who would take ivermectin because today scientific authority Fauci says it's a horse dewormer, and that is all the science, in quotations, that the mob needs. Excellent points by Scott Free, a very, very astute listener. And shout out to all the logical MindShock listeners. Again, I know I go on and on about the Dunning-Kruger crowd and all the cultist goofs, all the brain-dead cultist goofs, the Dunning-Kruger crowd. But yeah, I mean, obviously, the whole reason I do the podcast is I know that there are a certain amount of logical individuals out there. I'm actually kind of surprised. I never thought I'd have as many subs as I actually do now. And I've even gotten messages like on Facebook and other places of triggered goofs who they don't like the way that I objectively call out goofery and the Dunning-Kruger effect, the scientism cultists. They consider it insults because obviously they ignore 99.9% of all the podcasts. They ignore all of the sources on the screen. They ignore the substance of everything I say and only focus at the goof that I throw at the end. I mean, there's just no shortage of these people who claim that I just call anybody I disagree with a goof. Disagree with what? I'm not claiming anything is true or untrue other than the empirically verifiable scientific method that children can know. And just the basic definitions of words. I mean, that's really the only positive claims I've ever made. I'm not claiming a shape of the earth. I'm not claiming anything is true or untrue. I mean, just the level of goofery and not being able to comprehend the very motto of this podcast. The only thing we know for sure is that we don't know anything for sure. So, yeah, I mean, just these trigger goofs coming out of the woodwork saying that I need to have more humility. I mean, what's being more humble than saying I don't know anything? All I can do is offer empirically verifiable definitions of words. You know, the established scientific method. That's all I really do. That doesn't mean I'm smart or above anyone. A lot of these triggered goofs, I mean, they're so dumb. They're not even on this basic children's level, so they have to pretend I'm so far above it and looking down on everybody instead of me being at a normal children's level and them being so far below. That's why they're so triggered. Because they're not even at that children's level, so they have to pretend that I'm somehow being condescending or pretending to be a know-it-all, while the entire motto of the podcast is me not claiming anything at all is true or untrue. I mean, just the level of goofery and triggering of these people. I mean, they prove the points against themselves more than I ever could. But enough of that. Let's jump back into this display. I mean, something that's just, I mean, again, props to KALEB for handling this level of goofery and Craig. And because Craig just humiliated himself again going on with Jeranism in a debate, which this one was a longer one. I'm going to have to dissect that one again because just, wow, if you think Craig is bad here, I mean, he might even get worse here. I mean, I don't know. Like, he might be really providing some competition for Sartain. Again, his verbal diarrhea game, it's just not as good as Sartain's. Like, that's the problem. I mean, he spews fallacies with the best of them, but the rate of the spew might prevent him from taking the Dunning-Kruger crown. But we shall see. So, let's continue here.
An observation can be an experiment.
Yes.
Wow.
Wow, right off. Wow. So Craig is just flat out saying that an observation alone can be an experiment. So clearly he knows none of the steps of the scientific method. Again, KALEB, I have no idea how you do this. Because he's kind of like just circling the drain of bottom barrel, even for mentally disabled people. There's so many mental disabled people that are, they're not that dumb. They're like way smarter than Craig. So like, I'm not insulting mentally disabled people. There was a comment somewhere also saying that I was like discriminating somehow against mentally disabled people. If somebody's short and you call them short, that's not discrimination or hate in any way. That's an observation. If you call somebody a blonde or a brunette, that's not discrimination. You're not saying they don't deserve something or they don't deserve human rights or hating on them in any way. I'm not hating on Craig even here at all. I mean, I feel sorry for the poor guy. I mean, unless he has some kind of fetish for just humiliating himself publicly if he's not mentally disabled, or even if he is. I mean, I have no idea what his true motivations are, but how do you not feel bad for a guy that publicly humiliates himself to this level? I mean, is there nobody around him that cares about him and doesn't want his either mental disability or playing mentally disabled to just be on display like this? It's just really sad. It's really, really sad. But props to KALEB for being able to handle this.
If you didn't know that, that's fair enough. I understand that you've never studied physics, but
Wow. Okay, so now he's psychologically projecting. We spent a lot of time on Dunning-Kruger and mental disability, but I don't know if we specifically spent a lot of time on psychological projection and how accurate it is. So notice how his subconscious is now exposing him, because he's either clearly never studied physics, or he maybe tried to study it, but clearly didn't comprehend anything. I mean, not even the scientific method.
you learn these things when you physics, that over time, things can happen. You change the position.
Over time, things can happen. Oh, man. Wow. Did Craig miss his calling as some kind of like mentally disabled comic? Over time, things can happen. I mean, these kind of intelligent thoughts. I mean, this level of insight. I mean, have we ever seen anybody on this kind of intellectual level? I mean, is Craig going to go down in history, this intellectual powerhouse that says that over time things can happen, because nobody's ever known that? I mean, that is truly revolutionary. I mean, that's probably evolutionary even among the so-called intelligentsia of the world. I mean, over time things can happen. Is that dumb? Is that more or less dumb than his OC response? What do you want it to be regarding the definition of energy? Because that was a good one too. I mean, wow. Wow, this is crazy. This is crazy.
And the time you go and look at that thing to see if that thing has happened, and if that matches your predictions, then voila, you performed the experiment. If it doesn't match your predictions, you've performed the experiment and you've failed to falsify it, or you actually falsified it.
Wow. So again, just a clear, for anybody who can't follow here, I mean, it's just a clear demonstration of his mental disability. He doesn't know what independent variables, dependent variables, controls are. He doesn't know all the steps of the scientific method, or how to apply them, or the role of these variables. That's why I threw them on the screen. I mean, I don't know how many preschools learn this, but I did find preschool worksheets. I don't really remember preschool, but I don't think I learned the scientific method in preschool. I don't even think I learned it in kindergarten. It probably was more of like first grade, second grade. But there's clearly worksheets out there for preschoolers, even public, non-private preschools. So some kind of, I don't know, government preschools, kindergartens, whatever. They're on those websites. So again, Craig he's not even at that preschool level. So what can you really do with this guy? I mean, I think I accurately called it at the beginning. I mean, borderline vegetable. I mean, can this guy tie his own shoes? We do need that poll. I mean, I would actually be shocked if he could. Can he? I wonder if he's gonna take that challenge and upload a video of him tying his own shoes.
In that case, but absolutely, making an observation at a particular time and place can be an experiment. Absolutely.
Okay, so observation and experiment are synonymous to you?
An observation can be an experiment.
I'll ask the question again. Are an observation and experiment the exact same thing, or are they different steps of the scientific method?
Observation is step 1 of the scientific method. Okay. Experiment is step 4 of the scientific method.
Okay, so I don't know if he's just reading off a cheat sheet or a screen here, but yeah, this is tough. I mean, this is just really tough because even by his own words, again, maybe he wasn't looking at the cheat sheet before, the preschool cheat sheet, but now he's looking at it. If an observation is an experiment, I mean, if these are different, he's admitting they're different steps, but they're the same thing. So why abandon the rest of the scientific method? And again, notice how since he doesn't know what the scientific method even is or what the variables are, and that manipulation of variables is what lends scientific legitimacy, because then you know what you're testing instead of just hallucinating and guessing like a psychic or something. If the psychic made the right guess, that must mean they have psychic powers. According to Craig, yes. According to Craig, yes. According to basic logic and reason in the scientific method, no.
But an experiment can be an observation of a particular thing happening. That would be the prediction. The prediction you would make is, if my hypothesis is correct, then I predict that at this particular time, we will be able to observe the path of the light from a star being bent.
Okay. Oh, man. I don't know if I can make it through this. I mean, Caleb is just such a soldier to be able to handle this level of mental disability. Because Craig's just spinning his wheels here. But the thing is, he's not even accurate, because Eddington's predictions didn't even match. Like, none of those predictions matched. They threw out the results that didn't match. There's over 400% error rate in subsequent so-called observations. So that's not a match. So it's like spinning your wheels, but you don't even have tires on the wheels. I mean, and you forgot to put gas in the car, and you're not even on the road where you're trying to go somewhere. I mean, that's what we're dealing with here.
That's the prediction. The experiment is going to that place at that time and testing that prediction by setting up your equipment and monitoring what has happened. Most of science is just monitoring things and see if it matches predictions.
Which variable was manipulated? What is a control? You won't find Craig talking about any of these things because he doesn't even know what they are. This is so painful. I mean, I don't know if I'm going to make it. I hope the MINDSHOCK listeners understand the level of pain this is.
And that's exactly what they did in the Eddington experiment and every other similar experiment that's been done since then.
With over 400% deviations, and none of it matches anyway, and they threw out a ton of data that didn't match just to make it look like it matched. How many times are we going to go over Craig's ignorance here of Eddington and the subsequent follow-up experiment? I mean, this guy's done zero research on the subject. Notice he hasn't provided a single source. Not one source.
The fact is, it was a prediction, and they formed an experiment based on the prediction to see if it matched the hypothesis. It did.
That's a fact, because it didn't. They threw out everything that didn't. And even the result that was left was over 400% error from the follow-up observations. I mean, this is just so painful. I have to say, this is probably the most painful one. I don't know if Craig's going to get more fallacies than Sartain, or even that Brian Myers goof, but this is definitely the most painful.
They analyzed the results and they found they failed to falsify their hypothesis, the scientific method.
Okay, so you would agree
He just dropped scientific method out of nowhere as if it meant something. Because clearly it clearly is not in alignment with any of it, and he doesn't even know what it is. And then he says you only have to follow 2 steps in order for it to be valid, and he just says scientific method. He just says those 2 words without knowing what they are, like a little 4-year-old or 3-year-old. I don't want to insult, 3-year-olds. I'm sure there's a lot of 3-year-olds out there that are smarter than Craig.
With my hypothesis of unicorns, it would be just as valid if the assumptions that I make for the tending of the light towards the sun, it would be just as valid as the bending and warping of spacetime, right? If all the math worked out and we tested and over, the math worked out with the unicorns pulling the light towards the sun, it'd be just as valid as yours, correct?
And another point here, the math didn't work out with Eddington. Like, I don't know how many times I have to reiterate that, because Craig is just pretending and hallucinating it did. Again, I have multiple sources here, one of which is Harvard Labs. Over 400% error rates. Eddington admitted to throwing out the data that didn't match, which is why so many real scientists were skeptical about relativity, because it actually didn't match. Like, that's the main point. So, yeah, I mean, it doesn't even get there, but Craig's mental disability on full display here anyway. I mean, I don't know if Caleb's just humoring the poor guy for the sake of the audience. I'm guessing he is.
You can call it unicorns whatever you want. It doesn't matter what you call the thing.
Again, we're not talking about calling it. We're talking about the reason for it. So Craig is just this level of mentally disabled. He doesn't understand that Eddington, if gravity and relativity are at play here, that's the cause. If it's unicorns, that's the cause. It's not about calling a unicorn a Pegasus or whatever, and the name doesn't matter. It's or calling gravity whatever, some kind of magic pull instead of using the word gravity. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about the cause, not the name. But notice how Craig is too mentally disabled to even be on again, like we're talking preschool, kindergarten level English here. We're not talking about label. We're talking about reason.
The fact is, the experiment is something is warping the path of light.
Well, no. No, it isn't. Again, that's what you would have to prove. Presupposing it is, and in building this house of cards, again, as Caleb called out earlier, begging the question fallacy, and obviously it's also a false cause, circular reasoning, logical fallacy as well. And Craig, again, he just can't muster even toddler level brain power. He just can't muster it. And notice how many times he uses the word fact incorrectly, because none of this is a fact. It's like that's his only cope at being exposed, completely decimated and exposed. He says fact almost like his blankie, like he's trying to soothe himself from getting destroyed on this level. He just says fact almost like some kind of soothing mechanism, like a safety blanket, because clearly he doesn't know what the word fact is. Clearly the word doesn't apply here. Clearly I'm not arbitrarily dinging him with a fallacy counter, because that's a fallacy. In order for me to be objective, I have to count every one, not give him breaks, because then I wouldn't be objective.
You can call it unicorns, we call it space-time. If you want to form an experiment based on the predictions of unicorns, then that's great. Then we can analyze those results. But you tell me, what would the predictions of unicorns be?
Obviously, it's a hypothetical. It's obviously a hypothetical. So all I'm trying to show to the audience is that my reference frame and my assumption of why the light tends towards the sun would be equally as valid as long as the math works out.
So he doesn't even understand the parallel. Like, Craig can't even follow the parallel. Or he's pretending to, not being able to, because he knows he doesn't even understand the basics of the scientific method or first grade English even. Am I being too kind there? Preschool English? Also, some people pointed out, it looks like Craig might have some kind of earpiece. I don't know if that's a headphone or an additional earpiece. Commenters have said he was trying to get help from somebody, because, I mean, just this level of decimation. I mean, who's Craig trying to fool here, pretending he knows something about something? I mean, a first grader can give a better, would have put up a better, I mean, possibly even a kindergartner or a preschooler. I don't want to insult them. They could have put up a better defense than Craig here. I mean, this is just downright pathetic. I mean, there's no way around it.
Craig, do you think math is descriptive or explanatory?
Well, before we get there, we talk about what you just said. Again, you need to have a hypothesis and a prediction and an experiment. If you've got that, you're doing science.
Notice how he never mentioned dependent variable, independent variables, or controls, or the manipulation of variables. So clearly you're not doing science. To do science with no understanding of variables. Oh, man. Again, just props to Caleb. Oh, man. I really didn't know what to expect. Like I said, I've talked to him a few times in messages here and there. I really appreciated how passionate he was about logic itself. I mean, flat earth, globe earth aside, who cares about that stuff? Just he was passionate about logic itself, and it shows here. Because he's trying to have a logical discussion. But the problem is, it's kind of like having a discussion with a coma patient. I mean, yes, they might be able to recognize, even though when they're in a coma, they might be able to recognize words. They've done brain scans where there might be evidence that coma patients can understand to a certain level people that talk to them. So it's not that Craig is not responding to the stimuli of Caleb's words. The problem is he's not comprehending any. But again, props to Caleb here. I mean, he's trying hard to have a logical conversation. But how can you have a logical conversation with someone who's a borderline vegetable? I mean, I don't know. I don't have the answer there.
Right. But if you're just saying unicorns did it. In what way did unicorns did it? Just saying unicorns did it isn't a hypothesis.
They bent the ether towards the sun. The unicorns were grabbing the ether and bending it towards the sun. Is that better? Does that help?
That was actually kind of funny. Let's see if Craig has a mental breakdown, because I'm assuming Craig doesn't believe that ether exists. But that was actually a very good parallel, because you'd have to prove the ether first, right? Whereas Craig is hallucinating that gravity's already proven, and you're just measuring the results of it. So that's a great point from Caleb. Props to Caleb there.
And do you have a prediction based on a mathematical model for this to happen?
I could come up with it using the law of gravitation, which is just a math model, sure.
Right. So
you're saying it's interchangeable. So you admitting that you can interchangeably put space-time or unicorns in the equation.
And you could see it on his face. So we know he's not a complete vegetable. You could see when Craig was laughing at himself, he knows he got exposed there. And he has no answer for it. I mean, or we'll see what the answer is. But we know, so this is good. This is good. We know Craig is not a complete 100% vegetable. Because now whether this is evidence that he's being dishonest and not arguing in good faith, you can take it as, I mean, clearly he's still probably mentally disabled unless he's the best actor ever. But it appears there is some cognitive function. There's some.
Shows that you have no evidence for space-time. That's all I'm trying to get across to the audience.
Whatever you want. You can name space-time whatever you want. From now on, I'm going to call it Felicia. All right?
Cool.
The ping of Felicia is what causes the gravitational effects.
So again, here he's falling for the appeal to humor logical fallacy. He thinks it sounds more ridiculous to call it Felicia while missing the point completely, the reason behind what's happening, which is the whole purpose of science. If you could just call a phenomena or whatever, if it's just about switching labels, that doesn't mean anything. Like, what is the mechanism causing it? That's why you need those dependent independent variables and controls and manipulate them, so that way you can figure out whether something is actually causing something else or not. What you call it has absolutely nothing to do with this entire conversation. And I mean, this is roping in. I mean, I'm kind of hesitant to call it a red herring logical fallacy, because that would imply that Craig already kind of knows what he's doing here. I think his mental disability is too severe to intentionally red herring. But here, again, he's going etymological logical fallacy, appeal to humor logical fallacy, and red herring logical fallacy, because this isn't the point that Caleb is making. So he either doesn't understand the point, he's too much of a vegetable to understand the point, or he does have the cognitive function to understand the point, and he knows he can't refute it, so in bad faith, he's just deflecting and going red herring and pretending it's about switching labels because he can't actually address the real argument.
There we go. How's that? I predict that the warping of Felicia will bend the path of the light. Will bend the light path of the star towards our sun. So I'm going to make a based on the maths of Felicia and do an experiment. Oh, look, the warping of Felicia has done exactly what I said it to do. Happens that all of the maths and everything around Felicia is also the same as the maths for space-time. It doesn't matter. I've just used the name of the thing.
Again, we're not talking about the name. We're talking about what's causing it. So he's hallucinating that the basis of space-time or that there's any warping at all is going up, and then just switching the label of it. He's stuck on that, again, either because he's just that mentally disabled, or he understands that KALEB completely demolished him, and the only thing he can do is red herring here to cope.
Changing the name of something doesn't matter. You can call it what you want, but the mathematical model shows that this thing, unicorns, space-time, Felicia, whatever, is warping based on the interaction of large masses. That's what it shows.
No, it doesn't, because again, notice how there's not a single reference. Dependent, independent variables, controls, manipulating variables. Notice how there's none of that, because that's what proves scientific legitimacy. And he avoids that like the plague because he either doesn't know about it or he's just some kind of actor showing. Because he knows if he has to go to those variables and controls, then everything completely falls apart and he has absolutely nothing to stand on. Not that this is much anyway. I mean, this really isn't much either. This is probably the worst debate I've ever seen. Craig's performance here is the worst I have ever seen in any debate. I don't know if he's going to break Sartain's record in terms of quantity, but in terms of dumbest arguments, I mean, he's there. He's there. And I do have a question for all the MINDSHOCK listeners. Should we make an adjustment here? When there are fallacies that are so astounding, when the level of stupidity is just historic, like with Craig here.
What is energy, Craig?
Work done. Well, mathematically, what do you want it to mean? What do you want it to mean? What do you want it to mean? What do you want it to mean?
Should we have a fallacy, like a super fallacy? Like when he says energy, well, what do you want it to be? When he gives those kinds of OC answers, should that count as like 100 fallacies? Because if it's so astoundingly dumb.
What is energy, Craig?
Work done. Well, mathematically, what do you want it to mean? What do you want it to mean? What do you want it to mean? What do you want it to mean?
Should it count as 100 fallacies? I think it should. I think we should have super fallacies added to the list. Even if I don't know how to quantify them. Should they be 50? Should they count as 50, 100, 500? I mean, I don't know. Like that level of goofery, I mean, that was interesting. I was not, even from a mentally disabled goof like Craig, I was not expecting that level of goofery.
What do you want it to mean?
So I don't know. I mean, I'll let the MINDSHOCK listeners decide that. And for follow-up podcasts, for follow-up analyses, we'll see if there should be like a super fallacy, because that was definitely one of them.
So you're admitting that the framework of Felicia warping the light to go towards the sun is just as valid as space-time, right?
I've just changed the name of space-time. All of the maths, everything about Felicia is exactly the same as Einstein described space-time. It's exactly the same.
Let me ask.
Hold on. The only thing I've done, the one single thing I've done, is I've changed the name space-time to Felicia.
I don't know. It looks like he's being genuine here. It really does look like that he's just this mentally disabled, he can't comprehend that. Again, unless he's the best actor ever. I mean, he just really seems like he's being genuine. Because clearly, again, doesn't understand the scientific method, doesn't understand what science is or variables, controls, any of this stuff. He does not even on a basic preschool, kindergarten level. But he thinks he is. I mean, look the confidence in his voice. I mean, can you truly fake that level of stupid? I mean, again, if he's just this phenomenal actor, I mean, maybe he can. But I'm going to appeal to incredulity. Like, it's hard to believe he's this good of an actor. He's just fundamentally not comprehending that changing the name is not the subject of what we're talking about here.
Now, change anything apart from the name. All of the maths is exactly the same.
So if it's interchangeable, all the things that you said about the observations does not substantiate that a fourth dimensional fabric of space-time exists and warps light. Massless light, where gravitation's only supposed to act on mass. So you've substantiated nothing. I asked for evidence of space-time warping, a fourth-dimensional fabric, and you said that it's completely interchangeable, whether you call it unicorns or whatever you call it. So would you admit you have no evidence that space-time is a physical thing?
I mean, is he laughing at himself there? I mean, I don't know. Like, it's rough. If he wasn't laughing, I think I might have to take actor completely off the table. Or, actually, no, there's probably another explanation here. Does he have some kind of mental condition, a mental disability, where it's kind of like, people with, I forgot the name of the disease. There's some disease, like some kind of nervous system disease where there's like jolts, like it feels like you're being electrocuted intermittently, but not always. Is he almost a complete vegetable and there are just these glimmers of cognitive function and they're kind of intermittent? Is that what's going on here? Where like he can comprehend his complete and utter decimation, which is what those little laughs were about. But then when it comes time to really think about it, just those electric signals just aren't there in the brain. That might be my new theory when it comes to Craig. Because, I mean, KALEB has indulged him every step of the way, and he's still not grasping it. I mean, KALEB has lowered this to literally preschool levels. And Craig still thinks it's just about switching labels.
That warps in the presence of mass, and it could be anything.
Absolutely not. It's the Eddington experiment in 1919 and experiments similar to it demonstrate exactly what we have expect.
Wrong again, because again, they didn't. The predictions were all wrong by astronomical numbers, according to follow-up tests and observations, not scientific experiments, obviously. And he's like a child. Like, when he doesn't get what he wants, he kind of cries, but he doesn't have the mental capacity to cry in a different way. So he can only regurgitate, Eddington, 1919, Eddington, without even understanding the Eddington's alleged experiment and why it's not an experiment and why the predictions didn't match. Which is why they had to throw out so many observations. And even the observations that they left had over 400% error rates versus subsequent tests. And that's being generous because it could be far more. But those are the admitted numbers that we're going to go with according to Harvard.
Not only that, but we can move to modern times and look at the LIGO experiments, which also match 100.
Oh, wow, he went to LIGO. Not surprising. I don't know if somebody in his earpiece just told him to mention LIGO. So let's do it. Let's do the LIGO excerpt. And I covered this on another podcast as well. I will throw that in here. So now we're going to go to the goofs that claim that LIGO discovered gravitational waves that somehow prove relativity. Let's address this common argument by the scientism cultists. So, again, this is one for the coincidence theorists. Coincidentally, 100 years after Einstein's prediction in 2016, gravitational waves detected 100 years after Einstein's prediction at LIGO. So, the alleged observation of gravitational waves from colliding black holes. Now, everybody cites this and the existence of gravitational waves, etc., etc. What people don't know is that the data was injected. So, to the goofs that hallucinate that this is all conspiracy theory from crackpot websites, this is right on the official LIGO website at LIGO.org. The gullible goof scientism cultists going straight to the source they still disregard it because their cognitive dissonance is so extreme. Their mental weakness is so extreme because they view anything as blasphemy to exposing their religion as fraud. So you can go to www.ligo.org/news/blind-injection.php and the full admission is here. Blind injection stress tests, LIGO and Virgo's search for gravitational waves. The LIGO scientific collaboration and the Virgo collaboration completed an end-to-end system test of their detection capabilities at their recent joint collaboration meeting in Arcadia, California. Analysis of data from LIGO and Virgo's most recent observation run revealed evidence of the elusive signal from a neutron star spiraling into a black hole. The collaboration knew that the detection would be a blind injection, a fake signal added to the data without telling the analysts. Let me repeat that again for all the Dunning-Kruger goofs, coincidence theorists, and scientism cultists out there. The collaboration knew that the detection would be a blind injection, a fake signal added to the data without telling the analysts. So those that think and hallucinate and strawman that all the scientists would have to be in on it, it was all fake, obviously not. They self-admit that they don't tell the analysts. So the scientists are all happy and clapping and celebrating, yay, we discovered gravitational waves, when it was all fake. Now, how many times do they have to fake it and then everybody pretends, oh, well, this next time it was actually real? Now, you know what's weird? I mean, a fraudster who commits fraud so many times, are you gonna believe them when they say they're not committing fraud? Now, again, I'm not claiming that gravitational waves aren't real. I'm just saying, if they're admittedly doing blind injections regularly, why would anybody believe that a so-called real signal wasn't just a blind injection? I mean, how much of a clueless goof must one be to hallucinate that these people are trustworthy? And apparently they've done these blind injections multiple times. I'm not going to go through the entire article here. I already gave the URL. You can look at it here. Now, if that's not enough, let's look at further definitive proof of this fraud. Now, this is something else that I mentioned at least once in other videos. Theoria Apophysis, a very interesting YouTube channel. He actually talks about Jeff Amenko as well and the destruction of relativity, utter dismantling of relativity. He also has a very interesting video, again, where he's doing real science here. He's doing experiments you could do yourself with magnetism. So he addressed gravitational waves being discovered and the alleged equipment used to discover this and the alleged signal which they get once and never again. Is it within the margin of error of not even detecting anything? Is it within the margin of error of faulty equipment? Now, the gullible goof scientism cultists, they won't even consider that. They think all of this scientific technology is completely infallible. So, but let's watch this video here because it is very, very interesting.
Okay, once again we have some idiot scientists seeking publicity for more funding so they can keep their jobs. It was announced today that the Laser Interferometry Gravitational Wave Observatory, of which there are 2 locations in the United States and 1 in Italy, which were used for triangulation. 1 is in Louisiana, 1 is in Washington. They're laser interferometers, and they're supposedly gave proof or validation to Einstein's gravitational waves. Well, they didn't. Let's actually take a look at something that you can demonstrate here on your tabletop. This is actually an example of laser interferometry. Now, before I actually get to the demonstration, let's duplicate binary objects, and I'm going to use a pair of magnets right here. Got North Pole here, South Pole here, North Pole here, South Pole there. Let's actually demonstrate that underneath the ferrocell, but let's first talk about what they actually did discover, and let's take a look at their claims. Okay, when they've stated that when a gravitational wave passes through the interferometry, and the laser interferometer, well, this isn't the case. Space-time in the local area is altered. That's what they state. Well, that's BS. The EM phase shift retardation occurs. There's a magnitudinal measure, and space has no properties, nor does space alter any field modality. No proof for same exists. Likewise, Tesla and others have declared that space has no properties, and a field, of course, never has and ever could terminate in space. Space is not a terminal. They go on to state that depending on the source of the wave and its polarization, well, dielectric acceleration has absolutely no polarity. And they go on to state, well, the results in an effective change in the length of one or both of the cavities, the effective length of change between the beams will cause the light current in the cavity to become very slightly out of phase with the incoming light. Well, that's the key point there that they don't understand. The cavity will therefore periodically get very slightly out of resonance, and the beams which are tuned to destructive interference at the detector will have a very slight periodically variation of detuning. This results in a measurable signal. Well, this is a result you can see underneath any ferrocell, and it's a measurable signal. It's always it's a damn vortex, which is the same thing that they claim that they detected. So let's take a look at a pair of binary objects here in a second. Let's take a look at some pictures underneath the ferrocell of this EM phase shift retardation. Okay, here you can actually see the pointed patterns where we have a north pole of a magnet, here we have a south pole. They're actually phase shifting towards a center point. Here you can see the same thing. We have either magnet. We actually have a null point vortex right here as they're actually spiraling. I'll show you that in a second using the ferrocell. So this is what they claim to have witnessed, but they don't understand. See, observations are one thing, explanations are another. This is where everybody gets everything wrong. It's, well, we've made the observations and they're reproducible, and they did wait a good many months before they actually announced their observations, so I'll give them credit for that. But what they have explained certainly is not the case. The observations are not incorrect, it's only their BS explanations and comprehension of the simplex field theory. This is nothing other than this, and this is classical electromagnetic theory. This is electromagnetic retardation and theory of relativity, but this is not about theory of relativity. It's the proof that classical electromagnetic retardation disproves the theory of relativity. This guy, by the way, Dr. Oleg Dichenko, recently passed away. Multiple PhDs. He was a hardcore critic. This was a professor, endless math in this book, a hardcore critic of relativity. The proof that, for example, like GPS satellite correction has anything to do with proving relativity, he disproved that. He's written many books. There's another one by him, Gravitation and Co-Gravitation. He actually goes on to state that Oliver Heaviside accurately explained what gravity is in an appendix to one of his books, and certainly not Einstein. So the light phase vortex acceleration, the phase shifting, looking at EM phase retardation, is no different than that as seen underneath the ferrocell. And you can make a reference to this book. It's rather heavy. It'd make most people's brains explode. The entire fallacy of this discovery is that it uses the Fabry-Perot cavities, which of course proves my point entirely. It uses a beam reflector back and forth in these Fabry-Perot cavities to actually supposedly prove their claim. Well, their observations are correct, but the explanations are totally wrong. The light vortex due to the dielectric acceleration is no different than light passing over magnets in a ferrocell. You know, by the way, their observation is that there is a phase vortex actually occurring between these binary objects. Well, actually, they're not actually objects. They're null points in counter space. That which people call a black hole is a point where dielectric acceleration actually overcomes the possibility for manifestation. It's kind of like an absolute hole, except of course space is nothing. Space is the absence of inertia, and time is nothing other than a measure of magnitude. So what you're looking at is complete absence due to incredible dielectric acceleration. So anyway, these binary objects, I'm using the word objects in the vernacular here, so they didn't find any evidence of Einstein's spacetime, rather simplex dielectric acceleration. EM phase rarefactions and compressions, you know, space has no properties. Time is only a measure of magnitude, as I said. So they're only looking at high-order light capacitance phase EM retardation using the laser interferometer. So using a laser interferometer to actually measure high-order capacitance phase EM retardation. And they're saying, well, those are gravity waves. No, it's not. It's simplex dielectric acceleration. Phase cancellation is occurring when the dielectric acceleration is out of phase and amplified when in phase. This behavior is no different as that seen from light pass through a slit. Gravity does not exist as an autonomous field modality. It's simplex dielectric acceleration. These idiots are just seeking more public funding. You know, classical electromagnetic field theory explains the observations, a la Tesla and Maxwell, not the idiot Einstein and his warped brain, warped space-time nonsense. So let's take a look at something that these idiots spent countless millions of dollars creating, and let's actually mimic the exact same thing by using a binary object underneath the ferrocell. Let me turn the lights off, and let's place it underneath here, and let's wait for the image to develop. You can actually see that, you'll see this is a magnet here vertically, and one over here on the other side. Whoops, I flipped it there. There we go. Let's wait for the image to develop underneath the ferrocell. You see these egg shapes? This is a magnet here, this is a magnet over here. They're actually all coming to a null point at the center of the image here. They're all coming to a null point. If you actually look at the very, very center right here, you'll actually see a void. And this is, instead of, I'm using 4 poles here instead of 2, but this is the exact same thing. If you're actually to block out either pair of these on either side, block out this pair, block out that pair. This is the exact same thing that they report as having seen, and it's nothing other than simplex EM phase shift retardation. It's like, wow, that's just classical electromagnetic theory, a la Tesla, Faraday, Steinmetz, Oliver Heaviside, James Clerk Maxwell. It has no support and basis whatsoever to back up anything Einstein says. What you're actually seeing here, white banding, dark banding, white banding, dark banding, this is also EM phase shift retardation. Mother Nature's a really simple girl. She only works off 2 principles, and that is force of motion, inertia, and acceleration. And there are only 4 things to understand in the universe: resistance, capacitance, permeability, magnetic permeability, and dielectric permittivity. Now let's actually turn these magnets end on. Oh my God, look at that. It looks like a single magnet, but this is actually 2. In other words, when you look at either pole like that, it looks exactly the same thing underneath the ferrocell as it does with 1 magnet. Oh, how shocking. That would be a proof of a Platonic incommensurability. But this is the exact same thing they report in their own video as seeing. You actually see a vortex of binary objects rotating around a point, a null point of maximum acceleration and inertia. Is this any proof of Einstein's gravity waves? No, it's simplex electromagnetic theory. It's very, very simplex electromagnetic theory. This doesn't prove Einstein at all. It actually, all it does is it reinforces Tesla, reinforces James Clerk Maxwell. You see, Einstein didn't invent a damn thing. And what little ideas he did have, he stole from Henri Poincaré and others. There's actually many books out there about that. This is just classical electromagnetic field theory that explains the observations of Tesla and Maxwell. See, they actually make these very keen statements that they don't, they make correct observations, but incorrect conclusions and incorrect explanations, which is a huge fallacy of science. Huge! You can observe anything and you can reproduce the results. You can say, well, the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. It's like, well, yeah, you've made a huge discovery there. Well, the explanation is there's a team of unicorns up there in the sky, and there's a sky god, and he pulls the sun from one side of the earth to the other. And, since I made the discovery, then therefore my explanation is also correct. No, it doesn't work that way. It does not work that way. So their observations are correct. But this is just simplex, high-order, light capacitance, phase EM retardation. Electromagnetic retardation. Oh my God, a very classical theory that belongs to Tesla, Faraday, Steinmetz, and Oliver Heaviside, and James Clerk Maxwell. Has nothing to do with gravity waves. Well, where's the math for electromagnetic retardation? Well, I suggest if you were interested in finding out about that, you could buy this nice book by Dr. Oleg D. Jeffimenko, and you will understand everything if your head doesn't explode. Very, very simple. Gravitation and co-gravitation has nothing to do with gravity waves. We're talking about phase cancellation of dielectric acceleration of a binary object. Here we have a binary object causing phase cancellation as it's mutually going around a null point of maximum acceleration, or the center of gravity, if you will. Same thing as a hurricane. The eye of a hurricane, there's nothing there. Whereas the center of gravity, there's no gravity at the center of gravity. Oh no, well, this is gravity waves. You see these light waves? Same thing here, except I'm using a quadrature instead of a polar. I mean, these idiots spent millions and millions of dollars, and they want millions of more funding, which is why they made a huge press announcement. Because they want more money for more funding, because that will, pad their jobs for the next 20 years. And they're going to be looking for something that has already been explained 80 years ago by classical electromagnetic theory. Well, my God, let's reinvent the wheel and ask for a bunch of money for it. Actually, they revamped the laser interferometer over many years, so actually it's retroductive. What they're actually doing is justifying the cost of the upgrade that they've already spent many millions of dollars on, but also additionally to look for additional funding. So today's huge scientific announcement was nothing other than a pile of crap by a bunch of brainless scientists with more money and more gear than brains, looking for plenty of funding to keep their asses in work. Oh my God, what a timeless story of stupidity and ignorance and deception. Hooray! You discovered something that Tesla and James Clerk Maxwell already understood and wrote about decades ago. You're awesome. Not.
So again, what is real science based on? I mean, here we have empiricism. You can empirically verify these magnetic principles. So was this really simplex electromagnetic phase, rarefaction, or retardation? Or was it the alleged gravity waves and these repeated injected data experiments and tests where they admit to the fraud of injecting the data without even telling the analysts who get this data, then they're all happy. I mean, this is almost emotional abuse here. I mean, you're tricking people into thinking that they've discovered these great proofs of physics and science and made these leaps in human knowledge when you're just faking them out. I mean, that's low, but typical for the scientism cult. So LIGO was admittedly injecting data without telling the so-called scientists. So LIGO clearly not providing evidence of gravitational waves. And, of course, we do have other very, very intelligent individuals demonstrating what could easily explain gravitational waves without hallucinating that injected data is legitimate. And let's see if KALEB brings up the injected data here.
The predictions of the warping of space-time. Or,
How much is the fringe shift? How much is the fringe shift? How much is the fringe shift at LIGO?
Of what? Of the fringe shift in LIGO within the
of the lasers?
Yeah.
How much is it?
Within the margin there.
That's not an answer. Can you give me like a size? Like, can you give me a measurement of how much the laser changes?
And notice how Craig can never, ever provide any sources. I mean, even fake sources. He doesn't even have fake sources. He's got nothing. He's got absolutely nothing here other than his vegetative rambling.
How much?
I'm not sure the exact amount off by hand, but I remember it's within the margin of error of the machine.
So he doesn't even remember anything. Like, what is he doing here?
What would you say you do here?
Like, seriously, what is he doing in a flat earth debate? I mean, this guy's bringing wet sponges to tank fights. What is going on here? I mean, this is why I have my theory that the flat earth psyop, again, it doesn't mean flat earth is true or untrue. The psyop is to defend the globe earth intentionally so poorly. So here's my next question. Was he a recruited shill because he has a mental disability, not because he's actually a good actor? So they wanted to get real mentally disabled people for these so-called public debates, whatever. The social media presence. They intentionally went after the mentally disabled. So that way it would guarantee that they would put on these showings that are so poor as to recruit greater amounts of flat earthers to destabilize society, faith in institutions, etc. Not that anybody should have those, but obviously that would be destabilizing. So, I mean, I have to congratulate Craig here. I have a new theory thanks to him. Are they intentionally recruiting mentally disabled borderline vegetables? Because they can't risk that actors might not be good enough. That's my new theory. So thanks, Craig. We might be getting closer to the truth thanks to Craig here.
So you don't know the amount that the fringe shift happens, but you just believe that it.
No, again, I don't believe anything. I've looked this up and researched this before.
Then why don't you know?
So he looked it up and he believed what he read. He believed the headlines. Gravitational wave discovered. And he actually didn't research it because otherwise he would know about the injected data. And furthermore, he's saying it's within the margin of error. How does he know the margin of error is accurate? Like, seriously, how does this goof or any other scientism cultist, they just believe the margin of error is what they were told it was by the scientism priests and lab coats? How do we truly know what the margin of error is? With this fallible human technology and fallible human interpretation of technology. And injected data. Admitted injected data. I mean, here's the thing, too. Like, if they're willing to admit that the data was injected, I mean, just the level of goofery of coincidence theorists, I mean, just think about it for a second. If they're willing to openly admit that they injected the data and that they really weren't detected, what are they not admitting? I mean, goofs like Craig, they don't have the mental capacity to even consider that.
Because I don't have an eidetic memory. I don't remember every single thing I ever look at, ever.
If you're going to provide it as evidence, you should probably remember it. Don't you agree?
I mean, it's like talking to a preschooler. Like, he knew he was going on a flat earth debate. So obviously he knew he could bring up Eddington, right? So he knew he could bring up LIGO too, otherwise why pull that out? I mean, he's only really referenced, what, 2 things, 3 things? Like Foucault's pendulum, Coriolis, Eddington, and LIGO. So there's like 4 things. I mean, you can fit that like on a tiny little notepad.
What would you say you do here?
Like, I mean, he could easily have put the source there. I mean, literally, I mean, even some of these, the dumbest debaters on any subject, even they have some kind of sources. But he's got nothing. He had to look up the definition of energy. I mean, this is the most embarrassing, pathetic showing I have ever seen of anybody on any subject in any debate at any grade level. I mean, you could probably go to an elementary school and find a better debate than this, because Craig, I mean, this really is like dealing with a borderline vegetable. I don't know how KALEB is doing this. I really don't. I mean, this guy needs a medal.
Well, no, because I've got the internet and I can just look it up and show and get that information for you. Having an eidetic memory and remembering every little detail of everything is irrelevant.
Now he's spamming appeal to extremes logical fallacy. So he's and red herring logical fallacies. Nobody's saying you have an eidetic memory would mean you would literally remember every single thing you ever read ever. But having 4 sources for 4 points obviously doesn't require an eidetic memory. I mean, we're talking about, he only brought up like 4 things. It's not like he brought up 100 things and he can't remember one of them. I mean, just the level of goofery on display here.
To a conversation like this, just because you can spout off a bunch of stuff proves nothing.
Exactly, Craig. Exactly. Just because you can spout off a bunch of stuff about Eddington, alleged stuff, which is all completely wrong, obviously, and spout off a bunch of alleged stuff about what Foucault's pendulum allegedly proves because he doesn't understand how the scientific method works. Yes. So Craig is not a 100% brain dead vegetable. We have established that. His subconscious works at least a little bit.
What can be presented is the important thing, not memorizing a list of things.
I'll give you your answer. It was the width of a proton.
And notice how KALEB is prepared. So he either memorized it or he has it either on his screen or whatever. He's more prepared for the arguments that Craig is making. So he's prepared for his own arguments and Craig's arguments more than Craig is. Although, is that really a feat when you're dealing with a mentally disabled guy?
What would you say you do here?
Which was within the margin of error of the machine.
So how do we know that that laser moved because of the gravitational waves affecting it from black holes and not something like magnetism? How do we isolate gravity in that apparatus? How do we do that, Craig?
Again, we make a prediction. This is what we're doing here.
Look at Caleb's face. Wait, making a prediction is not isolating gravity or isolating a variable. I don't know if I could do this. I'm sorry, listeners. I don't know how much longer I could last here.
Predicting that if something happens, then we will be able to detect that this thing has happened.
Okay, so it'd be just as valid for me to say it'd be just as valid for me to say that because electromagnetism is a form, light is a spectrum on the electromagnetic, wavelength, right? It's essentially electromagnetic radiation, right? You would agree.
That's what light is, yes.
Okay, so how do we know it's not from the perturbation of the magnetic field that's coming from the Earth changing and moving the light? How do we, if we can't decipher that it's gravitational waves or magnetism or electrostatics or some other phenomena of the ether causing the fringe shift, you cannot ad hocly assume that it's gravitational waves from black holes. Do you see the problem here? If we can just make predictions and say, oh shit, well, actually, the gravitational waves do this amount of fringe shift. And I could say, okay, well, actually, the difference in the magnetic field relative to the perturbation source would be different, causing this exact same fringe shift. Either claims are equally as valid, is exactly what you're saying. So there's no way to prove that the fringe shifts that happen at LIGO are caused by gravitational waves.
Wow. Should we have super zingers too? Because that was a good one. Wow, that was actually very impressive by KALEB. I have to say, I'm pretty impressed here. Because he broke that down in simple terms while still addressing the critical factors, like without glossing over. So he kept it simple, but addressed the main factors there. And he's just getting this fluoride stare from Craig. I mean, this is tough. But KALEB definitely deserves a medal. I mean, I don't know how anybody can handle Craig for longer than 2 minutes. I mean, unless they're trained. I mean, unless there's some kind of social workers with all this training and how to deal with mentally disabled people.
Right.
Oh, so you're talking about the actual fringe shifts of it detecting, not the the normal fringe shifts of it within the margin of error. Okay, sorry, I was confused by what you meant, the way you phrased it. Yeah.
He was confused by first grade phrasing. Again, I mean, can you find a more wrong guy for this type of debate?
What would you say you do here?
So the actual detection of the gravitational waves comes from a prediction. When we see something happen, we predict something will happen, and then we test to see if that thing will happen. For you to say, oh, well, it's just as valid as saying it's the perturbations in the Earth's magnetic field, well, that would be something you would have to substantiate by measuring the perturbations of the magnetic field of Earth and seeing if they happen at the same time as the measurements of the gravitational waves from black holes colliding.
Wow. Just when you think this guy can't sink any lower. Wow. I mean, is there any point this guy hasn't missed so far? Because, okay, so let's say, obviously, gravity is not uniform. It's not a uniform 9.8 meters per second squared. But you can average it out, because in certain areas of the world, there's variations. But if you want to say on average from all the points. So what's the reason behind it? Is it because mass attracts mass? Or are they electric forces? So your predictions and measurements would be identical. And he completely missed that point. I mean, his redirection, deflection, and just copes due to not understanding the basics of the scientific method. Again, I'm sorry. I don't know how long I can handle this. I don't think I'm going to make this in one more part. We're going to have to go part 3 on this. Because this guy is, I mean, there's just no brain activity here.
How do you measure gravitational waves?
Well, LIGO's doing that.
How is it doing that? How's it doing it?
Notice how he just spent, KALEB just spent all this time asking how it's doing that. And notice how KALEB, again, this is why he's a mentally disabled goof. That's not an ad hom, because we just went over the arguments why. Because if we did it without the arguments, if we just said, oh, KALEB's an idiot and wrong about everything because he's brain dead and he's mentally disabled, that's an ad hom, because that's used instead of the argument. We're going over the actual argument, which is the methodology of the scientific method, identifying variables, having controls, etc. So the question is, how did LIGO do that? And his response is, oh, well, LIGO did that. I mean, again, I don't know. I don't know how much longer I could last here. I don't know, man. I don't know.
Measuring the space warping from the gravitational waves which are traveling out at the speed of light from the large collision of two masses.
Wow, talk about going over something going over somebody's head. He just keeps regurgitating the religious dogma. He's asking, how does it show that? And all Craig can offer, oh, it shows that because he memorized a religious scroll. And ignoring the injected data, because that's not even real data. So again, it's like, is it possible for Craig to be more wrong or dumber about literally everything he brings up? Because he's bringing up Eddington as if the predictions were valid. They weren't. They threw out all of the observations that didn't match the prediction, and over 400% error rates when further observations were done later. So none of the predictions matched there anyway. Now with LIGO, he's hallucinating and pretending the data was legitimate. So it wasn't even legitimate. It was injected data. But even if it was legitimate, it still doesn't prove what's causing that. And he just can't muster the basic mental capacity required to comprehend that.
How is it measuring the gravitational waves that are coming at the speed of light? How does a laser do that, Craig? How does it do it?
Those gravitational waves warp the actual that the light travels down the LIGO arms.
And you could see, like, he's sputtering and stuttering. He doesn't know how any of this is done. So all he can do is regurgitate what he took on blind faith while ignoring the fact that it was all injected data anyway. I mean, you could see it on his face. You could hear it in his vocal intonations. He's just trying to save face any way he can here. But obviously, I mean, he's so mentally disabled. He doesn't seem to have the awareness of how he's humiliating himself here. I mean, I don't know, unless he was intentionally trying to be the dumbest guy to ever participate in a flat earth debate. In which case, congratulations, Craig. You did accomplish that.
So when the light goes and comes back, well, that we know it takes to get there and back because light travels at a certain speed in a vacuum. And when that changes, we know what speed light travels in the vacuum. It's 100
Have we measured the one-way speed of light?
Oh, man. I mean, Caleb's absolutely decimating this fool. I mean, I don't necessarily have a problem with him calling him out on the speed of light. I mean, that's just a whole different argument. I guess he wants to have it now, which is fine. But, I mean, Craig just completely missed the point. Like, he's hallucinating that the prediction or whatever, the measurement, proves the reason behind it. Obviously, false cosmological fallacy, and ignoring the scientific method of variables and controls, of course. Because Caleb's question was simple. How do you know that how do you know that what the light is doing isn't being affected by electromagnetism versus gravity, the bending and warping of space-time? Because the result of it, what you're measuring, you can only measure what's going on. You can't measure what's causing it. That's why you need the scientific methods, variables, manipulating the variables, and controls. Because otherwise, how do you know what's causing what you're measuring? I mean, this cannot be broken down any simpler, and yet Craig still doesn't get it. I mean, this is so tough.
Well, no, we can measure the return speed of light. It's fine. That's absolutely
Yeah, so
valid.
if it's going in one direction and coming another direction, how do we know it didn't go 75% and 25% in the way back? How do we know? How do we decide that?
Mechanism for that to be the case, and it doesn't match any other observational data. But excuse me.
How could it match observational data if that observational data wasn't made, as he just admitted it was a return speed? And again, he's hallucinating all of the equipment used to measure this is somehow magically infallible. I mean, again, I don't know how Caleb does this.
We know the total time for it to take to get there and back. Right, the total time is what's important here, not the one-way time.
Actually, that's exactly what Caleb asked about. So pretending something's not important. I mean, that's actually really important. This might be a super fallacy as well. If it takes you a certain amount of time to drive from whatever, New York to LA and back, and you broke the speed limit a whole bunch of times one way, not the other way, and your total time was the same as somebody else who did it in a different vehicle or whatever, it's kind of important to know how long it took to go one way versus the other way, especially if you're trying to be extremely accurate. For example, gas mileage at different speeds, because obviously, you know, the gas mileage is gonna differ based on how fast you're going. So to just look at the total round trip time and say it's inconsequential, I mean, what kind of level of gophery is this? I mean, it's almost like Craig is intentionally trying to provide the dumbest arguments while appearing to be the most mentally disabled individual to ever participate in a flat earth debate. Again, if that's his goal, congratulations, Craig. Congratulations. Because I don't think anybody can argue that he accomplished that. I've never seen anybody argue worse than this. I mean, just there's no cognitive function here. I mean, there's practically none at all. And then, of course, even again, he's not even on a kindergarten English level. Even a kindergartner knows, like, if there's two groups of people, if the class is split into two groups, one group's going to recess, one group's having nap time, saying, we know. Well, who knows what? If the nap time group, if they're playing kickball and they scored an X amount of points, and the kid, you can't just say, we know that. Who knows? He's speaking for somebody else. He can only speak for himself. Because even among scientists, there's dissent on basically everything. So this collective narcissism of, we know, we went to the moon. No. Individuals might think they know, which is completely different. But if he's not even on a, you know, preschool, first grade English level, I mean, there's really nothing substantive to be had here.
Time there and back. And when that total time changes, matching the predictions of what we expect to happen from a collision of large masses like black holes, then that's what it's detecting based on our predictions. If you are saying it is from something else, like the perturbations of the magnetic field of Earth, then you would have to substantiate that, like I said, by measuring the perturbations of the magnetic field of Earth and seeing if that coincides with the fringe shift detected in LIGO, which matches the predictions of gravitational waves.
Wow. So completely didn't understand anything. How does he know that's not what LIGO is measuring already? Not to mention it was all injected data anyway.
Okay, so how do we isolate that gravitational waves are causing the fringe shift in the interferometry equipment at LIGO? How do we isolate it? You can't just say, like, I hope you realize you saying that, oh, we make a prediction and that prediction is substantiated in reality, so that means my theory is right. If I make the same predictions with electromagnetism or the ether or anything else, and the predictions match the math that I create for the observation, my theory is equally as valid as yours.
I mean, I don't understand how Craig is just this dumb. I don't think he can tie his own shoes. I really don't at this point. Like, let's get this even dumber. Let's boil this down. If you believe Bigfoot drops off your mail in the morning, so you predict that Bigfoot is going to drop off the mail. So if the mail is in the mailbox at the time that you predict, and then you make the observation, oh, look, and you went and checked your mail and the mail was there, that must mean Bigfoot delivered it, because that was your prediction. It couldn't have been the mailman. It couldn't have been it couldn't have been Chupacabra or Mothman. It could only have been Bigfoot because it matched the prediction at the time. According to Craig, I mean, think about how dumb that is. And that's all Craig has.
What would you say you do here?
You have to isolate. You have to isolate the independent variable to show that gravitational waves are affecting laser equipment in LIGO. You have not done that, so you cannot say that that's proof of the bending and warping of space-time.
I mean, that should end it right there. I mean, I don't think Craig knows what an independent variable is, dependent variable is, or what controls are. But yes, you have to isolate the variables in order to know that it wasn't Mothman or the mailman. It could only have been Bigfoot. And even then, you'd have to manipulate variables to really prove that in the sense of the word prove. But yeah, I mean, good job, Caleb. I mean, if he can't grasp that, there's just... I mean, I know Caleb is doing this for the audience, but still, we have to applaud him. We have to applaud him for this.
Okay, so again, you just said a bunch of things saying, oh, it's equally as valid if I have this mass. But the thing is, the mathematical model that you are suggesting doesn't exist.
What? So he's going to flat out denial? That's interesting. Okay.
Okay, once again we have some idiot scientists seeking publicity for more funding so they can keep their jobs. It was announced today that the Laser Interferometry Gravitational Wave Observatory, of which there are 2 locations in the United States and 1 in Italy, which were used for triangulation. 1 is in Louisiana, 1 is in Washington. They're laser interferometers, and they're supposedly gave proof or validation to Einstein's gravitational waves. Well, they didn't. Let's actually take a look at something that you can demonstrate here on your tabletop. This is actually an example of laser interferometry. Let's wait for the image to develop underneath the ferrocell. You see these egg shapes? This is a magnet here, this is a magnet over here. They're actually all coming to a null point at the center of the image here. They're all coming to a null point. If you actually look at the very, very center right here, you'll actually see a void. And this is, instead of, I'm using 4 poles here instead of 2, but this is the exact same thing. If you're actually to block out either pair of these on either side, block out this pair, block out that pair. This is the exact same thing that they report as having seen, and it's nothing other than simplex EM phase shift retardation. But this is the exact same thing they report in their own video as seeing. You actually see a vortex of binary objects rotating around a point, a null point of maximum acceleration and inertia. Is this any proof of Einstein's gravity waves? No, it's simplex electromagnetic theory. It's very, very simplex electromagnetic theory. This doesn't prove Einstein at all. It actually, all it does is it reinforces Tesla, reinforces James Clerk Maxwell.
Okay, so obviously this is fallacious. We can go into a bunch of different fallacies for this. I'm just trying to keep this as simple as possible. This is simply a false cause logical fallacy, which is, of course, one of Craig's favorite go-to fallacies, which he's been spamming for hours. Now, obviously, it's not just this fallacy, because it's also kind of a tu quoque, because he's asking him for proof. Caleb's asking for proof on how he knows it's one, not the other. Craig is just outright denying. No, you provide the proof. Because he didn't provide his own proof. It's also a whole bunch of other fallacies, but I don't want to, spend like 10 minutes going over every single fallacy, because these are all overlapping fallacies. But it's also just flat out denial, because clearly this, not only does a model exist, but there's actual real experiments you can do. I've already played it before, but I'll just play it again, just for goofs like Craig to comprehend that not only equally valid, it's much more valid, because you can have your dependent variables, independent variables, and controls, and clearly demonstrate this with basic magnets instead of relying on fancy equipment from scientists and priests who inject data to tell you that gravitational waves were detected when they obviously weren't.
The mathematical model that LIGO uses that shows that it's gravitational waves does exist.
Again, both models exist. Just because a mathematical model exists doesn't make it true.
And the predictions that we can make from that happen to match the experimental data that we get from LIGO.
Does he mean the injected data? The fraudulent data?
The way that you isolate the gravitational waves is by making a prediction of the thing the gravitational waves will do.
No. Wow, this is definitely a super fallacy. You don't isolate Bigfoot from Mothman or the mailman by predicting that the mail will be in the mailbox. That's not, see, this guy he doesn't grasp the absolute basics of what these variables even are. There's nowhere to go. I mean, this guy's just too much of a vegetable.
If gravitational waves are real and happening, then they will do this.
If Bigfoot is real, if the mail is dropped off by Bigfoot, the mail will end up in the mailbox at this time. If you check the mailbox and the mail is there, that your prediction is proven. And it turns out that it can only be Bigfoot that dropped it off.
To the interferometer experiment. That's what you do to see if that happens based on your prediction. You isolate other things like electromagnetism by measuring to see if there's electromagnetic interference. You isolate atmospheric interference by putting the LIGO in massive vacuum chambers.
Well, they actually didn't. They didn't do that, and I think I'm gonna have to end it here because I don't know how much more of this I can handle. I'm sorry, we're gonna have to go part 3 on this. This goo is so utterly clueless. He thinks that magnets they somehow wouldn't have any of their forces if they were in a vacuum chamber. I mean, anybody, even people with mental disabilities. I mean, you could just do a quick Google. This guy doesn't even know how to do a 2-second Google search. I mean, come on. Just look it up. IOP spark. Magnets will attract and repel just as well through a vacuum as in air. Physics.stackexchange.com. Magnets work perfectly in a vacuum and in the absence of a gravitational field. They don't depend on any environment or medium. I mean, you could just find this endlessly. Endlessly. I mean, middle school level, high school level. So how is it isolating by putting them in a vacuum when magnets work just not work just as well, according to all of the available scientific literature, even all of the scientism literature that Craig is a religious follower of, even his own religious dogma, any source you want, will clearly show that magnets work just as well in a vacuum. So how is doing this in a vacuum isolating electromagnetism? So that's it for me. I mean, I just can't handle any more of this. I'm really going to try to bang this out and finish it out in episode 3. All the respect in the world to Caleb, because I don't know how he does it. And yeah, I mean, all the MINDSHOCK listeners out there, let me know what you think about super fallacies in the counter. Because we have so many, not just we have super fallacies here. Because Craig is just, I mean, he's just, this is the worst defense. I mean, this is such a bad defense, we can't even call it a defense. I mean, this is just vegetative ramblings. Mentally disabled vegetative ramblings. That's all he has here. Wow. Okay, so hope everybody enjoyed another edition of the MINDSHOCK podcast. This logical analysis of Craig of Fight the Flat Earth versus Caleb. Of versus Caleb, KCDINDUSTRY. This was part 2. We got to do at least one more. Hopefully I can finish it in the next one. If you find the podcast interesting and informative, and you want to help dull my pain in dealing with this level of goofery, help support the podcast, donate to our PayPal, check the link in the description. You can also become a YouTube member right here on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe, like, and share Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, Patreon. Questions, comments, theories, thoughts, suggestions, rebuttals, debunkings of any kind, leave them in the comment section. This is Bruce McGuire signing off. Catch you guys next time.